everybody. Welcome back to Unbroken Arrows podcast. As always, I'm Catherine.
And I'm Greg. And today we have with us Trevor Hubbs. And Trevor is the Armed Forces Initiative Coordinator for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Welcome, Trevor.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
That's awesome. Thank you. Now, to get started today, what we'd like to do is ask about the mission of the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
Yeah, so Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is a nonprofit conservation organization. Officially, the mission statement is Backcountry Hunters and Anglers seeks to ensure North America's outdoor heritage of hunting and fishing in a natural setting through education and work on behalf of wild public lands, public waters, and public wildlife. And really what that means is we're a North American-wide organization. We have chapters in Canada, chapters in 49 U.S. states, and we're working on public land access projects. We just opened a bunch of access in Arkansas through buying 1 acre of private property and then permanently giving that to the state Department of Natural Resources to provide an easement.
Nice.
We do projects like that in Montana. We do a lot of fence removal in the west that helps with like large cervid migration and helps sage grouse avoid getting hung up in fences. A lot of like trout stocking in the east. A lot of shoreline management up in like Maine, Massachusetts, trying to keep those like historic clamming beaches clean. But really, it's how do you get the general American public to enjoy these public lands and waters that they own, right? Like they've paid for it. Like, how do we get people out there?
Sure. So how did you get started with BHA?
Yeah, so I came on in, so let me go back a little bit. In 2018, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers asked in their general membership survey they send out every year, are you a member of the military community? So at that point, 12% of the membership or 12.5% of the membership came back and said that they were either active duty, reserves, National Guard, Gold Star families, or a veteran. And that's interesting because if you look at, depending on which kind of federal survey for that demographic you look at, it's between 3 and 5% of the general U.S. population fits into this demographic. So without really trying, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers had already created an environment that was attracting over double what the what the federal kind of standard was or what the rest of the country was seeing.
Sure.
So at that point, BHA started to dig into, okay, well, what are we doing well? Why are we attracting this demographic? What are we doing bad? What should we have more of them? Should we have less? It was just kind of new information. So that's when they brought me on as a volunteer at first, because I fit into that demographic. And then me and 4 other guys that I kind of served with, like friends of friends of friends. You get it. We kind of started experimenting with some of the data, some of the follow-up questions, doing a lot of interviews. And what was interesting is not only was 12.5% of the membership, of the total membership, fit into this military community, but that 12.5% was the majority of our state like elected volunteer boards. They were the ones running over 50% of our beach cleanups, of our like public land pack outs, kind of where you go with a trash bag and a backpack and carry out as much trash as you can. Like right. They were the ones running all these events. They were some of our most effective volunteers fit into this military community. And then we started to get into it even more and really dig around at why this public lands, public waters, why hunting and fishing really matters to this military community. And there's a bunch of different reasons. Like there's not one like silver bullet there, but whether you talk to the Veterans Administration or psychiatrists focused on PTSD or traumatic brain injuries or any of these experts, right? Like they kind of agree on 3 things that people need. They need after service to kind of come back. They need 1, a community, right? And if that community involves other veterans, other people with similar life experiences, all the better.
Right. 2,
they need a hobby. They need something that they can go do that is not just sitting at home and then going to work and that's it. And the 3rd thing is they need a mission. And that's the most important piece, is because for whether you were in 4 years or 8 years or 20 years, work was your mission. Like every day, you're making the world a better place by just going to work. So then when you get out, you become, truck driver, bank teller, CEO of a company. Doesn't really matter. Your mission isn't going to come from work anymore. You need something. Now, whether that's volunteering at your local church or managing the volunteer group at, I don't know, some sort of like recreation softball league, it doesn't really matter. As long as you have something bigger than yourself to continue serving, because that's such an innate part of who you are as a veteran, as an active duty service member, that you need that. So BHA kind of haphazardly or like stumbled into providing all three of those things for folks and started attracting this membership. So they brought me on full time in 2020 as the Armed Forces Initiative Coordinator when they decided to make the Armed Forces Initiative, which is the smaller segment of BHA just focused on the military community.
Okay. Yeah, your story resembles or sounds very familiar with Catherine's and mine with regard to our discovery of how many people, active military and also retired, that have a story to share, and how hunting and being in the outdoors is part of that healing process from their experiences. So that is something that we're trying to make sure that we support, we continue to make aware, for our veterans and our active duty military folks.
What is your background with the military?
Yeah, so I joined the Army right out of high school. Basically training in Georgia. Was airborne infantryman, stationed in North Carolina for a while, and then I finished as an ROTC instructor at Eastern Illinois University, which is a small state school. That's where I ended up getting my bachelor's, and then got out of the Army, and now I do this.
Okay. Well, just out of curiosity, do you, in your percentages, you said it was 12 point, around 12% of the membership. Do you have a further breakdown between veterans, retired military, and active duty?
Sure. Yeah. So that 12.5%, that was in 2018. Currently, we're at 36.5% of the organization, which is give or take about, it's give or take about 17,000 members. Nice. At the end of the day. Like, and it's always growing and shrinking. It's kind of a revolving door because some people's their membership lapses and then they get an email and then they renew. And anyway, about 17,000. So the breakdown on that is we're approximately 35% active duty, and I don't have a breakdown on like Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, but 35% of those are active duty, and that's always the toughest part because it's constantly a revolving door. So within the Armed Forces Initiative, we have chapters in 46 states or detachments in 46 states, and then we're also on about 49 active duty military installations, actively running like mentorship programs to keep people or get people out hunting and fishing when they get stationed there. So you don't have what almost everybody in the military that I talk to has is, yeah, you grew up hunting and fishing, but then, yeah, let's take an example. You grow up in Missouri where you can hunt deer, you can hunt turkeys, you have great bass fishing, but then you go to Georgia for your basic training and can't do anything there because you're getting yelled at all day and you're busy. And then you get stationed, right? And then you get stationed in North Carolina and you're still getting yelled at every day. And you've never been in North Carolina, but now you have hog hunting, you have bear hunting, you have quail hunting, you have the saltwater fishing a couple hours away. So even if, and your boss still yells at you every day. So even if you get up the courage to ask your boss, like, hey, how would I go about hunting and fishing here in North Carolina? How would I experience this? That guy got there 6 months before you did, and he has no idea either. So you have this turnoff of people that used to hunt and fish and then in the military for 20 years and never hunted and fished the whole time. And then trying to get back into it. So the active duty component, our active duty installations, try to combat that a little bit by just offering opportunities. So no matter where you're at, the goal there was no matter where you get stationed in the world, like we could send you to somebody that either knows the answer or knows somebody who knows the answer on how to get you hunting and fishing.
And that was my next question with regard to, you said everybody or somebody, wherever you get stationed around the world. I have two children, a daughter that's active duty Navy and a son that's active duty Air Force. And my son is preparing to move his family now to Italy for a minimum of 4 years. Does this stretch to different countries, or is it all primarily in the United States?
No, it does. It gets dramatically smaller when you go overseas just because the opportunities do get harder. But we do have clubs or groups in Korea, Japan, Italy, and Germany right now. Germany is definitely the strongest one, but it was the first kind of overseas clubs that we started. Okay.
Well, Trevor, I've got some questions that we've got some questions that we want to ask you about the different issues that are part of the Backcountry Hunter and Anglers mission. And first, I want to ask about access and opportunity. And in my mind, access equals opportunity. So is this one of the major priorities of the BHA?
Absolutely. Access is always going to be on the forefront there. Now, it takes a bunch of different, like, we can go down this road for a whole other podcast, because it looks very different depending on where you're at in the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like my county, where I live in Wisconsin now, is less than 5% public land.
Right.
Now, I think that's great, because where I grew up in Missouri, I'm driving an hour and a half to the nearest public land to go hunt.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas here, 20 minutes, I can be on 4 or 5 different properties. Now, they're small properties, but I can be there.
Right.
Now, then you go out to Montana and you talk to some of those folks, and if you're in a county with less than 50% public land, like, they're like, wow, this is the worst thing ever. There's no access. There's no anywhere. So it's very, like, dependent on where you are. Like Nevada, Utah, even more public land out there. And there's all kinds of threats to public land. Like, if we took Utah, there's the Fair Housing Act is something that's been coming around, kind of rearing its head through a couple different administrations. Essentially, it's the state government trying to buy federal government land to then sell that land back to private entities who are going to develop it for housing, golf courses, things like that.
Okay.
It's obviously something that we go against there. There's we hear the Pebble Mine up in Bristol Bay, Alaska, trying to put a sulfide mine, which is this whole interesting dynamic. They've done a couple of those. Like, there's one in Montana. They wanted to do one in Alaska. They wanted to do one in the Boundary Waters. And really what that is you have a large, 4 Olympic swimming pools of sulfuric acid. And then you put tiny, tiny bits of rock that have, not quite microscopic, but flakes of gold or copper, whatever the mineral they're going after in them. And the acid will eat the rock, but not the copper. So then you have all this spare rock that they have to, shovel out and get rid of. And they sort that dust or that mineral, and then they combine that mineral into bigger chunks. And it does work to make these fine metals, but you also have just these pits and these huge piles of sulfuric acid infused rocks that have to go somewhere. And there's never been an example of those not dramatically affecting the environment. So we fight against that. And then we also go to, like I kind of discussed a little bit earlier, how do we buy smaller parcels that will grant access to larger parcels? Or how do we, if private or public land already exists, how do we get access? So like our group in North Carolina, we just finished a boat project about 35 minutes south of Fort Bragg, which is now called Fort Liberty, where public river, public waters, you can duck hunt on it, you can trap on it, you can fish on it. It's great. But the only way to get access would be by like throwing your kayak off an overpass and then jumping in and swimming, which people do. Like, it's possible. But if all we have to do there is just using the state land that you can already do, is just build a path and a ramp and it's like a composite floating kayak boat launch there. So
kind of a specific question, but talking about like river access, I know in South Dakota, there's a lot of land that you can only access by water.
Yes.
Is there anything that you guys have done to help people who maybe don't have like a boat that they can just go hop in and get to those properties?
Yeah. So normally it's a lot of education, which is really where my whole job comes in. Is I end up doing what do we do now? 186 events in 2024 for about 2,800 participants, and that's physically like taking them out, teaching them how to hunt or fish. So that's where that would really come in, is how do you get access to this land? How do you chase antelope, mule deer, whitetails, pheasants, chukar, whatever you've got, in a way that is sustainable and repeatable, where you don't need to depend on any other group to take you hunting anymore. At least enough, or you've experienced at least enough to go out and have a chance of success again. So we have done several events. I don't know in South Dakota. I know we've done a lot in Southern Illinois recently. Illinois has some goofy water access laws. We have a couple in Missouri that are strange, and then there's some states where you're allowed to touch the water, but if you touch the stream bed with your feet, like, that's trespassing. And then there's a lot of them, if you go the water bed is public, but if you go above the high water line, that's trespassing. And then what a lot of people don't know is on like the New England coast, like, you have all these people that are spending millions on millions of dollars to have these huge beachfront houses. Well, they actually don't own the beach, like, legally. Like, they could put up fences and do anything to block the beach they want, but that's your beach. Like, up until the high tide mark, that's public land. Same in Texas. And it's so we fight that fight a lot of people illegally blocking off access to things that is not. We have another one unrelated to water access, the Crazy Mountains right now. If you've in a very interesting mountain range in Montana, I've hunted elk out there before. It's really neat. But there's only 4. I don't want to say the exact number. But there's somewhere like 12 access points around this little island of mountains. that you can go through and you can get access, and it's mostly public up there. But these access points all run through historic U.S. Forest Service easements. But there's a rule with those easements that if they're unused for a period of time, then the easement is null and void. So what landowners do is they'll just put up a fence on that easement, and then people will walk up. Oh, I guess this isn't this is the wrong map or something, and go around. Right. And then all of a sudden they can prove, yeah, nobody's been on this trail for 5 years. It's mine again.
Right.
And then they turn around and sell access to all this public land that they can only get through this person's ranch for an elk outfitter who's charging $8,000 a piece, or a mountain goat or bear hunting and stuff like that. Which I don't mind outfitters. Like, that's not the point. It's you're blocking access to public land that has existed for 75 years because you put up an illegal fence for 5 years.
Right. Right.
So we do a lot of stuff with that.
You're talking about public lands and waters, and you talk about conserving priority landscapes. What exactly is a priority landscape?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked. So that's another big part of my job is, so the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Board of Directors, which is an all-volunteer board, get together at their meetings and they decide what the priority landscapes for each year is going to be. And they're always kind of different. But once they're on that priority list, they don't really fall off unless something dramatically good happens. It's kind of like going on the endangered species list. Like, so let's see, 2 years ago, the biggest priority landscape was the Boundary Waters, and that was due to that copper sulfide mine. So one of the things that we tried to just, let's call attention to that priority landscape, explain what's important about it, why it matters, and then what the major threats are and how you as a citizen, as a public landowner, somebody who pays taxes in this country, can do to make sure that this resource exists for you, exists for your children, kind of in perpetuity. So the way that the Armed Forces Initiative, my little section, runs into that is particularly with the Boundary Waters, the canned response you would get from your senator. So BHA, we put together a communications packet to where you log into the website, all you have to do is click a few buttons and it will sign your name to a letter, and it will automatically send that letter to your elected officials for you based on your zip code. So you don't have to do any writing. It's very easy to do. Now, I'd very much encourage everybody to do their own writing, even if they want to just change the first couple sentences or add some kind of personal story. But if you don't have time, you're busy, you can do it from your phone. Very simple. So the canned response that you get from a lot of the folks on Capitol Hill with that is, unfortunately, we are supporting this mining operation because it's essential for national security, which I personally took offense to. Like, I wrote a pretty nasty response to my personal senator here in Wisconsin, who's no longer a senator in Wisconsin. But it's because that's a very canned response that you can use, and you're going to get support from 99% of the country. Like, oh, it's national security. I get it. Because obviously, like, there is no landscape as important as national security as the country continuing to persist and exist, right? So it's a very easy kind of catch-all, like, oh, well, we have to do it. But if you really dig into it, it's a mining company that's owned out of Chile, the country of Chile, and they already have a contract to sell all the goods mined in Minnesota in this Boundary Water mine to China. Like, it's already a contract, and it's a way around China not buying from the U.S. because they had the embargo, or to whatever the legal term there was. So it's literally it's the Chinese government propping up the Chilean government to create a mining company with Chinese executives to start a mine in Minnesota to then sell those products to China through Chile. And it's just this.
It's a web.
It's this whole. You're going to have a hard time convincing that that's national security. So what we did is we ended up taking 18 veterans, active duty military, kind of folks from this community up there for we're in the Boundary Waters for 10 days, canoeing, doing a lot of fishing, showing like, yeah, this land's kind of like just a middle finger to those specific group of senators that were on both sides of the aisle. And it says, hey, this landscape is important to national security, but not the way you think. It's important to national security because places like this, wild places, are key elements to help this military community kind of come back from service or heal or whatever you want to say. I know, like, if you say heal, some folks get upset because they're like, well, I'm not broken. And same thing with like PTSD. Like, some people just call it post-traumatic stress because it's a natural reaction to experiences you've had. There's no disorder about it. So I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I'm trying to use the language that helps best explain what we do. Does that make sense?
That is the short video, right? That's on.
Yes, that's the first short video we did. So I'm glad you brought that up. So we have one of those videos, and we do a priority landscape event like that every year, whereas one of the 180 plus events we do every year. So like last year, the biggest priority landscape that the board decided to send us to was the north slope of the Brooks Range in Alaska. So basically the board comes to Trevor and they say, Trevor, here's the part of the country, bring attention to it and use the military community to explain why it's important to people. All right, I can do that, and fits in with my mission because then I get to take kind of have not an open checkbook. I guess still it's a nonprofit. We watch our budget, but I get to do things that normally I wouldn't get to do with my budget for folks. Like a lot of our events are how to do something locally, right? How do you go hunt quail in North Carolina, or how do you go catch redfish in Louisiana? Like, how do you go do something that you can do every weekend? We're not really about this, these like once in a lifetime experiences. Like we don't send people to once in a lifetime Rocky Mountain elk draw tags or 50-inch moose tags and stuff like that. So now I'm taking a bunch of folks that are either recently stationed in Alaska or decided to retire from the military in Alaska and teach them how to use this resource on the north slope of the Brooks Range, which is about 270 miles north of the Arctic Circle. Really cool event. And we ended up hunting caribou because for them, it's a $15 tag. It's nothing crazy. And they can shoot 5 of them as a resident of Alaska or as a non-resident stationed in Alaska. Like if you're on active duty orders to one of the military bases. So it took 10 people up there, 10 members of this military community. And just really the biggest piece with that is, one, we got a lot of video of this kind of natural resources. We got glaciers, and we came in, we drove 15 hours north of Fairbanks, took a jet boat 33 miles upriver, and then we inflated rafts and floated the 33 miles out while we're kind of hunting while we go. And it's a really interesting time. Everybody saw caribou. Everybody had an opportunity. There were some folks that really wanted like just these big caribou. And the trouble was the first 3 days, everybody was shooting like the first caribou they saw that was legal, and they were having a great time. And then one guy shot this massive, like it's a Boone and Crockett, just this beautiful bull caribou. And then everybody's like, oh, well, if those are out there, I'm going to hold off and wait for another one. And we had a couple people pass some stuff that they probably shouldn't have. But anyway, so that was the National Priority Landscape event last year. And that video should come out May 1st.
I think I need to move to Alaska. $15 for 5 caribou.
It's like $7 for a moose tag. It is insane up there.
Goodness.
And then, it's pretty incredible. It's a pretty incredible part of the world. And so the biggest piece there is, hey, this exists. And everybody has it on their bucket list, right? Like everybody who's hunted or hunted big game is like, yeah, let's go. I'll go up there eventually. And they save all this money and they pay $10,000 to an outfitter. But that's all public land. Like you can just go do it. And I mean, we broke the cost down per person. Like obviously for this, we paid for everything. But if you wanted to go do it, you like right now, tomorrow, to schedule a trip for August, it would cost you about $1,750, give or take. Depending on, now there's an extra $1,000 for taxidermy that's not included in there if you chose taxidermy, but if you just did a European mount, it's a little, it's much, much cheaper. But for $1,700, that's basically what you're going to spend to go to Idaho or Montana and go on an elk hunt.
Right.
I think one thing we were looking at, in Alaska, depending on what you're hunting, I think caribou might be the only one that you don't actually need to have some sort of like licensed guide with you if you're not a resident. For like bear, moose, sheep, I'm pretty sure you need to have some sort of licensed guide for all of those.
So you need one for grizzly bear, you need one for either the sheep species that's up there, and you need one for mountain goats. But for moose, you can do it by yourself. For caribou, you can do it for yourself. Black-tailed deer, you can do it by yourself. And black bear, you can do it by yourself.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Trevor, what about fair chase? And that's something that's also part of your priorities and missions. And on the website, it talks about the use of drones. And the one thing that I guess I just want to add with technology is it's unfortunate that what happens with technology can be a tremendous help in what you're trying to do, especially in the outdoors. But always somebody tries to find a way to use it, not necessarily always illegally, but in a way that is a detriment to maybe the health of the herd. Or it's just a detriment to others. So what can you tell us about that particular issue?
Yeah, so the drones is tough because if folks don't know, like the really big thing with drones right now, particularly in Ohio, we just had a conversation with the DNR about it in Wisconsin, but all over the country really is folks can put these like infrared camera devices, which you could buy from like Milwaukee Tools because they make one for electricians to like figure out when wires are hot.
Sure.
But you could rig that up to a drone. Like you're not buying a necessarily crazy expensive piece of equipment. Now they can get very expensive if you wanted something, but you could rig something up in your garage if you're relatively handy, and you could fly that drone over the woods at night. And it started as like, oh, well, I have a deer that I shot a little far back and I can't find it. Let me fly this drone over, and it's going to read that deer as hot on this infrared,
Right.
and then I can go find it. Which, that's great. You have less animal loss, you have less loss to wounding, you have higher recovery rates. That should be a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, there's nothing. We talked to a game warden about it a couple weeks ago in either New Hampshire or Vermont. I get those kind of Northeast states confused sometimes. But there's nothing legally. So once they approve that as a legal means of pursuing animal, even if they can write it up to where it's only for tracking game that you've already shot at, or like, the problem with it right now is in those states, nobody's discovered the right language mix, right?
Mm-hmm.
So where if you got out of your truck and you just fired a shot into the air and then got your drone out and started flying, like somebody stops you, like, yeah, I hit a deer and I'm looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
You may not actually be looking for it. You're hunting for deer with your drone, or you're pushing deer towards other hunters. And there's no way right now, according to that game warden, that you could convict that person of doing something that is wrong, right? And but it's kind of obviously, it is evidently wrong. And the reason it's wrong isn't so much like, well, new technology is always bad or anything like that. Like, that's the way of the world. We're always going to advance. But the problem is how we manage wildlife in this country is all based on carrying capacities, based on success rates, harvest rates, average number of hunters in the field. And as these dynamics change, we're always going to have to change how many tags we issue. So we'll talk about a fictional area in Montana. I actually taught this class a couple of weeks ago, so it's kind of fresh.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to call it Region 100, which doesn't exist in Montana. And we're going to say that they carry 1,000 elk on this piece of this region. Now, if 1,000 elk is like the average, so in springtime when calves happen, you're up to 1,250. At the end of winter, when everybody's been hunted and there's roadkill and disease and there's not enough food, you get down to about 800, and then they have calves again, back to 1,200. So the average is 1,000. Now, in most of the western states, you have a success rate for hunters at about 10% for elk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now that's because people are hunting them with rifles, muzzleloaders, and bows, not crossbows in Montana. That's a whole separate issue. But it's in line with this, because if we increase the amount of technology, like whether with drones or with crossbows, and that harvest rate goes from 10% down to 25%, now instead of offering 1,000 tags hoping to kill 100 elk, you have to offer 500 tags, or whatever that math equals out to, because you can only afford to take so many animals out of that herd every year, given a certain success rate. So it's not that this drones would be wrong. It's not that like there's a moral issue. It really comes down to the scientific management, according to that North American model that we use, is, are you willing to have a higher success rate for most people if less people get tags? And that depends on the state you're in and how you want to manage that as a state legislator or state Department of Natural Resources. So it's a really kind of touchy subject, where you can have a state like Arizona that maybe not necessarily doesn't prioritize access for all. They prioritize large trophy bull elk, which is really cool. It's not the wrong way to do it, because when you won't draw a tag in Arizona every year, but when you do, you have a really good chance at a huge, like, just premium specimen of this species, and that's really cool. Very healthy herds, smaller herds, but very healthy. Then you go to Montana. Montana prioritizes opportunity versus like trophy animals. Not that they don't have trophy units in Montana or they don't have big elk, but you get to hunt elk. It's something like 66 days a year. And if you're a citizen, you can just go of that state, you can just go buy an elk tag. If you're a non-resident, it's pretty easy. You have to wait 1 or 2 years to get enough points, but you can go buy an elk tag and pursue that elk almost all over the state on this public land. It's really cool. Now, you may not get a really big elk. You have a less percent chance of success, and you have less overall these huge mature bulls, but you're out there chasing them. You're out there enjoying the natural resources that the country has. So it's just different methods, and I'm probably confused more people than I solved the issue for, but that's the tough part that we're looking at right now.
Well, as Catherine, I think, has mentioned on our notes, it's a dicey subject, and you mentioned that as well. You know, it's one that's,
fair chase is just so different for everyone. Some people, fair chases, you can only use a bow. Some people, it's all right, you can use a rifle and you can shoot them from 600 yards away. And other people are still, if you're not doing your traditional stick and string, you're not fair chase. So
All
It
right, and
gets
it's dramatically different based on what part of the country you're in too. Like there's
mhm.
still boys in the southeast that run deer with hounds, and that's how they've always hunted deer, and it's legal and everything is kosher with them. And then there's people one state north in North Carolina or Virginia that are like that's barbarism. Like that's ridiculous. That can't be fair. Like it's a wildly complex subject based on cultural and historical norms, all kinds of stuff.
Well, Trevor, I have more questions on the different types of programs and things like that, but we really want to focus on your job as the uh, coordinator, and we want to talk about the Armed Forces Initiative. And so you've talked a little bit about what the mission and vision for the Armed Forces Initiative is, and
Mm-hmm.
and you've talked about the number of people that are part of your organization. So if a person is interested in getting information about being a participant or becoming a member of BHA, what do they need to do?
Yeah, I mean, the best place in this day and age is social media. So it's just BHA AFI on Instagram or Facebook. My name's Trevor Hubbs. You could follow me and then backdoor your way into following them if that's easier for you. You could also head over to the website, which is backcountryhunters.org. And if you go to programs, we're right there, Armed Forces Initiative. And yeah, you talk about our mission, our vision, what we do. We'll have a couple videos up there. We've got blog posts on probably about 30% of the events we do, and that's just because I physically run out of time to write stuff. So I try to write a blog post or a little 500, 700 words every time we do an event. But you'll see we have about 30% of them in these what is this section called? AFI featured stories. Um, got a story about turkey hunting, story about antelope hunting up there. Kind of just talks about what we're doing, why it's important for these natural public places to exist, and what they mean. Like, what is the purpose of adjunct outdoor therapy? What does it mean? How do you get involved with it? That kind of stuff. And hopefully you like what you see and you decide to give me $25 a year, and I use that to go put more veterans, more members of the military community outdoors. And in exchange, I'll send you four editions of a magazine that's pretty good that sometimes I get to write.
So you've mentioned a couple of different activities, the one in Alaska and one at the Boundary Waters. What are the different events that you sponsor?
Yeah, so I mean, we run, like I said, 180 plus events this year. We have space for 2,800 participants. We're probably going to get about 6,000 applications. And really, let's go down to the events tab. I'll just read you what we have coming up here. So this weekend, we have Oklahoma fly fishing, which is like an introduction into throwing a fly fishing rod, casting poppers for panfish, for bass, stuff like that. Let's see. Yesterday, Monday night, we have a Get Started Western Hunting Seminar, which is more of like an online informational. Like, all right, you've learned how to whitetail hunt, you've learned how to hog hunt, or whatever you do back east. Now you want to go out to Idaho or Colorado or something and try your luck. Here's what you would need to do that. Let's see. We have a turkey scouting workshop in Colorado coming up this weekend. They're going to be mapping out fences that we'll go back and pull. So it's interesting. We're going to split off into groups 3 or 4 and walk turkey habitat on public land. And one, we're marking turkey spots that we can come back and pursue in a few weeks when their season opens. But 2, we're marking where these fences are that are on public land that need to be pulled down in order to allow better access for migration corridors. So it's kind of a dual purpose event, which I'm really excited about. We're taking 15 folks turkey hunting in North Carolina on April 11th. We're taking another 8 folks turkey hunting on April 12th in South Carolina. We have another turkey event. It's a lot of turkey events this time of year. April 26th in Tennessee. We have a river cleanup in Southern California on May 3rd. And then get some, I don't want to say the bigger events, because they all do really the same thing. It's, do you get veterans outside teaching them how to hunt and fish? Do you introduce them to a local community of peers that have the same life experience that also want to hunt and fish? And then did you teach them enough to where, 1, they can go hunt and fish again without help? 2, they know enough about the North American model of wildlife conservation that if like a threat to their bass area or their quail spot or whatever comes about, they have enough that they could stand up at a public hearing and say, as a veteran, this is important to me because,
and
right?
Right. And that's another important part of your mission, right, is sustainability. And so the R3 initiative is emphasized. So as part of that, what are the types of things that you do in those events or at some specific events to retain. You're recruiting in some cases, but you also do want to retain.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so really the Armed Forces Initiative, a lot of it is, we call it R2, right? Because we are recruiting a little bit, but most of these folks, they grew up hunted, they've hunted before, they chased squirrels with their dad or their uncle or turkeys or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then like myself, like I was in active duty and the Army for 8 years and I didn't hunt the whole time. Mm-hmm. Right. Like, very big problem with a lot of the folks on our board is we just lost touch because 22 years of war or whatever, you're busy. Mm-hmm. But so the recipe that we have so far for how these events works is depending on the type of event. So for a duck event, you're going to be paired with a mentor who will probably have 3 mentees because you're in a duck boat or a duck blind, and that's easy to maintain. For a big game event, it'll be one-on-one mentor to mentee, because rather than taking 4 guys out there looking for deer and all sitting in one ground blind, it's just easier on a one-on-one basis. So when you're sitting with your mentor or walking around with your mentor calling ducks, he's teaching you the kind of how he or she is teaching you the how to hunt part, right? So this is how I train my retriever. This is how I set my decoys. This is how I blow a duck call. This is why I'm using this cartridge instead of this cartridge. This is my comfortable range, and this is how I've determined what that range is. All of these kind of the tactile, like how to go do this again skills during the day. So it's a very, like, this is what a deer track looks like. This is what good habitat is. And then in the evenings around dinner, because they're an immersive experience, we have a couple different classes. Normally these are 2 or 3 day events. We're going to teach history of public lands. We're going to teach, and in that we're talking about why they exist, why they're constitutional, where they exist in different parts of the country, how you find access to them, all kinds of stuff. Call it really more of a public lands 101 versus history of public lands. Mm-hmm. And then we'll also hit on a species specific kind of biology class where we'll bring in either a state biologist or an expert or an ecologist from our own organization to talk about like shortgrass prairie ecosystems, or why turkeys in this part of North Carolina act this way, but then if you go down into the lowlands, they act this way. And really so they learn enough about turkey biology or the species specific biology to help them hunt. They have enough experiences in the field that they can go hunt, and they know enough about how turkeys are managed, where their hunting license dollars goes, the Dingell-Johnson Act, things like that. So they're just aware, like, all right, buying a hunting license isn't some sort of weird government scam. Like, it all pays back into this system that allows me to hunt more and more.
Right. One of the things that we wanted to talk a little bit about too are the state chapters of the BHA. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that 49 of the 50 states have chapters. Is that correct?
Yes, we're missing Hawaii.
Well,
how do each of the chapters from like state to state differ?
Really, they have a lot of the same structure. We look for like a 10, maybe an 11 person board of directors, which are all volunteer. And some are very, very good. Some could use some improvement, but they focus on different things. So like Ohio, their big thing right now, well, probably written to the end of this, but right now they're focused on like the winter Great Lakes steelhead run. That's very important to them. In Ohio, they do a lot of turkey events, a lot of deer events, a lot of cleanup events, a lot of Great Lakes stuff right there on Lake Erie, walleye, things like that, versus like Montana is very focused on policy, especially with the crazy mountain stuff we talked about earlier. That's very alive in that part of the country. So they do a lot of Camo at the Capitol events, which is essentially you dress like a hunter because you're a hunter, and you go to the Capitol and you talk with folks, and you walk in and out of senators and various state legislators' offices, and you talk about what's important to you as a hunter. And they have these kind of meet and greet days, which are very nice. But yeah, so I guess the type of event is different, but the mission's always the same. Mm-hmm.
Do the states, like different chapters in different states, ever work together on common goals, or is it each kind of separate?
No, so that's the point. So unlike like if you look at like a Ducks Unlimited, because everybody knows Ducks Unlimited, each one of those chapters has its own 501c3 under the main one. So they all have their own bank accounts, their own this and that, which is great. At BHA, we are one 501c3. So everybody's money goes in the same pot. And what's good about that is when I have an issue like Bristol Bay in Alaska, where I've got to throw a bunch of money at advertising and lobbying at bringing awareness to this project, I could pull money from Maine, Massachusetts, Texas, Oklahoma, not just the folks in that very rural part of Alaska. And that's part of what makes us very effective, is I can pool money and go after a shared public resource that our members know, even if they never visit, it's still important that it exists, right? So that's kind of the difference on the finance piece. But oh yeah, so we have a lot of chapters that work together. It's kind of where we fit, like this. The Armed Forces Initiative is a new kind of program. Well, newer. I mean, what's it been? for 5 or 6 years now, since concept to where we're at. Because we exist nationally, right? And we're a part of each state chapter. Like I have a Armed Forces Initiative liaison whose job is to sit on that state chapter board, but he's talking to the states, he's talking to his local military community, he's talking back to me and my national board. It's an interesting dynamic that we're working through, but yeah, a lot of states join together all the time, especially in areas like New England or like the Chesapeake Bay region, where you have a very big shared resource that everybody uses all the time. Rocky Mountain states, but another example.
And I'm going to guess that you can also find the information for your specific state on the website in terms of the events and the planning and how to get involved at the state level.
Yeah, absolutely. So you would just go to the chapters section of the website, find your chapter, specific to your Armed Forces Initiative detachment, like what bases we're on, where we could find people. The best one would just be to go to Armed Forces Initiative Leadership. You've got a little bio on me, all of our volunteer board members, and then if they couldn't, if you wanted to go straight to the source, we do have a list of like representatives by state that you can go. Now, if you wanted to skip all that, and because you don't have time to go to the website, that's fine. All the state leader email addresses are super simple. So it's just the abbreviation of the state, then the letters AFI@backcountryhunters.org. So Illinois is IL, AFI@backcountryhunters.org. Missouri, MO, AFI@backcountryhunters.org, etc. The only exception to that is if you do NE for Nebraska, it's actually going to email New England, because I created New England before I created Nebraska and was like, I'll deal with that when Nebraska comes. And then like 6 months later, I had Nebraska. So Nebraska is NB. So we're just kicking that down the road till I start a New Brunswick chapter, and then it's going to be a problem. Until then.
What are some of the resources that you guys continue to need so that you can properly complete your mission and values?
Oh, that's a great question. So from our first event that we hosted in fall of 2020 through now, like our first year, we did 200 participants, and we thought we were doing great. And now we're doing well over 2,000 participants a year. So the two kind of biggest things we need is one, I need more mentors. So if you wanted to head over to the website and find an event local to you, like you don't have to be an expert. I'm not looking for, the greatest hunter in the world. I'm looking for somebody that could walk a newer hunter through the field and say, well, this is what a deer track looks like, or this is how you rig up a walleye jig. Like whatever you're an expert at, I can find you a way for you to help mentor and help share those skills. So I need mentors first. And the second thing I really need is I need more funding. Like we're doing a great job. We get a ton of support from our corporate sponsors, but our goal in the next 5 years is to take 20,000 participants out a year versus the 2,000 we're currently taking. So that's a lot of growth. And I estimate we're going to need about $500,000 a year to do it, and then to operate at that level. Currently, we're at about $177,000 a year. So if you are a private donor and want to give us money, that's great. If you know a company that wants a great tax write-off, that's great. If you know somebody that wants like some advertising credit or something, we'll put you in videos and tell everybody how much you help the veteran community. So a lot of ways to work together. But yeah, the two biggest things I need more mentors and I need more money. So.
Well, Trevor, thank you for your time. We do appreciate you taking the time to visit with us, and it's been enjoyable. And I think you mentioned earlier that some of the things that we touched on are maybe topics for individual podcasts later on. So
yeah,
we'd love for you to join us again if that's a possibility. But again, thank you for being part of the Unbroken Arrows podcast.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'd love to come back anytime.
Great. Thank you. If you or someone you know is thinking of suicide or in need of crisis intervention, call the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. And additionally, here are 3 ways for veterans and their loved ones to receive confidential crisis support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Contact the Veterans Crisis Line by dialing 988, then press 1. Or you can chat online at veteranscrisisline.net, or you can text 838255. To all our listeners, take some time, get outside, enjoy the outdoors, and experience its healing powers. With that, until next time.